we are in a series, as Karina said, called Jesus and on earth as it is in heaven. And so what we've been doing is probably taking all the stuff that you shouldn't talk about or people don't think you should talk about and talking about them, right? If people say don't talk about religion and politics, well, if you kind of step that back a minute, religion is just believing on, like, why are we here, right? How do we get here? What are we supposed to be about? So if we don't talk about that, then we're not talking about anything that's really important. And then politics would be just like, okay, since we're here, how do we function? All right, so we talk about these things. And so we're in this series looking at the things that really are on everybody's mind, the things that we face every day. We've talked about technology. Brandon, who did a great job on that a couple weeks ago, it's something that we all interact with and deal with. And not only what does technology like do for us, but what does it do to us? And just thinking through that in the light of who Jesus is and what he teaches. We talked last week about possessions. We'll talk about suffering, things that we just all deal with all the time. And if you hadn't noticed, you will shortly. We are in a political season, and it's coming back with a vengeance. And so, also, if you have not noticed, our culture doesn't handle that really well, right? And I wish I could say that Christians, oh yeah, look at the Christians, they handle that really well and everybody else doesn't, but that's just not the case. The Christians can often treat our politics just like everybody else does, and I'll get into. So another part of this series that we want to emphasize is, like, I want to just preach these messages as kind of a framework or a framework for understanding, like, what Jesus teaches on these, and then we want to have avenues and outlets to continue to process through them. So next 2 weeks from now, we'll talk about suffering, and in probably towards May, we'll have a women's kind of half-day conference retreat just talking about suffering. In politics, we're going to have our kind of quarterly book discussion, which we're going to have one on March 12th on celebration of disciplines. Our book that we're going to read for second quarter will be on politics. Either this book, which has shaped some of this sermon. It's called The Spirit of Our Politics. It's by a Christian named Michael Ware, who works in the political realm. And just a side note, Brandon is a part of a couple different cohorts where they bring experts in different areas, like areas of technology, areas of the arts, areas of politics, and there's kind of one person represented in this cohort. Brandon's kind of the technology person, and Michael Ware is the political person. So it's somebody that Brandon works with and is familiar with. So there's this book, and there's another one that's super helpful. So I'm not sure exactly which one we're going to discuss, but this book has shaped a lot of this message, and it's a super helpful resource. So I just wanted to say that before we get started. I also didn't know if I should call it Jesus in Politics or Jesus in Government. They're kind of the same thing, right? And what this passage does is more of like, how is he relating to the government and how do we do that? So we'll get that. So, but I wanted to emphasize is, how do we allow who Jesus is, what he teaches, to shape how we view all these different areas? So a lot of times we'll look at these areas, we'll look at Jesus through the lens of these areas, but we want to look at these areas through the lens of Jesus. And one thing, and this is going to be a generalization on this first quote that I read, that we can take, if we have these different issues, like on technology or money or on politics, like, okay, like just don't come near that with your Jesus. But that's not how the way the works. John Mark Comer, and again, this is a generalization, in his book Practicing the Way, said many Christians don't consider Jesus all that smart. Holy, sure. Kind, yes. Even divine, but intelligent, not really. And he makes his point of this by saying an increasing number of Christians don't agree with him on crucial matters of human flourishing. They would rather trust a politician, a celebrity, or a pastor gone rogue than Jesus the teacher and the disciples in the writings who studied directly under him. So if you have a political perspective, you can find somebody, you can find a pastor somewhere who will affirm your political perspective, like no matter what it is. We can always kind of search out and who's somebody that agrees with us. But the encouragement, the call is to look to Jesus and say, hey, what does he teach about these things? How do we go to him? and be shaped by who he is and what he teaches in his way versus politicians or celebrities or pastors who want to be celebrities. He said they would never even think to consult Jesus on the pressing matters of our time. Things like politics or justice, which we'll talk about, racial justice. We'll talk about justice in general next week. Sexuality, gender, mental health, and so on. He said, as Dallas Willard said, what lies at the heart of the astonishing disregard of Jesus, I like this, found in the moment-to-moment existence of multitudes of professing Christians. So he's saying, oftentimes, we have a disregard for Jesus on these very significant, important issues. He says it comes from a simple lack of respect for him. We don't think he's that smart. We don't think he can really speak into these areas. We don't think he really understands what we're facing or what we're going through. So don't talk to me about Jesus and possessions. Don't talk about me, Jesus and politics. But it just doesn't work. If to follow Jesus is to trust and trust in him to lead you into life or the life that we desire, it's hard to entrust your life to someone who you don't respect. It's hard to entrust your life into somebody who you don't look for their intelligence or their way. And so we need to have a right understanding of who Jesus is and go to him to inform these areas of our lives. And that's what we're trying to do with this series, is to look at what Jesus has to say and teach on the most pressing matters of our time. Can we all agree that politics is a pressing matter? Can we agree that it's not handled very well in our world? Like we can't even dinner with people, right? Or we can be like, hey, just don't talk about that. Why? Because we can't speak and talk to people in a way that is compassionate and loving and caring and respectful. And that is because what Ware said in the book is the tendency is to make an idol of politics. An idol is something that we trust in more than we trust in God. We can functionally trust in politics more than we trust in God. Now we would never say that out loud, right? But the tendency is that we make an idol of it. And when we do so, the first thing Ware said is that we set it apart from God. Again, let's just categorize this thing. I have my relationship with God here, and then I have my politics over here. Okay? And then when that happens, our faith or what we believe or who we are becomes useless. It doesn't shape how we think things should run. Or the other mistake that we see and that we all can make is we set politics above God. And then our faith gets co-opted by a political party or political position. We see a lot of that. Correct? And so our faith gets co-opted by an agenda. And so today, and this is what Ware talks about in the thing, you won't ever hear me tell you to vote for somebody. I actually got accused of this yesterday. You won't speak against this person. You won't speak against that person. I was like, yeah, I won't. I'm concerned with Jesus, and what I am concerned with and what I will preach on is what kind of people are we? Where it says, how do we become the type of people our politics needs? This is what our country and every country needs. We need to become the type of people that our politics needs. To have an impact, to have an influence. So I am an advocate. I am less about a position and more about our posture. There's people that vote for different people for different reasons. They value different things. What Christians are called to is how we treat people. Jesus said something about it, right? Love God and love who else? Neighbor, right? Guess what? Not all your neighbors, got a few of them in this room. Not all your neighbors think like you and vote like you and believe like you. But Jesus calls us to what? Love them. Because Jesus is more concerned with what? Posture. Who we are. And so what we want to look at today is how do we become the type of people that our politics, that our government, that our country, that our city, that our community, that our neighborhood needs. That's what we should be passionate about as a church. And just so we know, there was nothing different then versus now. The exact same thing is going on. We see it in this past. It's so sorry, I'm the pastor. I'm supposed to be like, oh yeah, of course. It's striking to me how relevant the Bible is. It's been striking to me how relevant Jesus' teaching on possessions and technology and the church have been. And so I don't know why I'm surprised. I'm like, oh yeah, Jesus was right again. We see what's going on then still goes on today. And we see it in verse 13 to 15, the context that Jesus teaches on government or politics. In verse 13 to 15, it says, and they sent to him some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians, what does it say? To trap him in his talk. And it says, and they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and you do not care about anyone's opinion. For you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. And then he says, is it lawful? This is the trap. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But Jesus says, but knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, why do you put me to the test? He says, bring me a denarius and let me look at it. So first of all, we need to notice is that what's going on here? What's the context? What are they doing? It's a trap. Okay? 99.999% of the time, when somebody asks a Christian or asks somebody else about politics, it's a trap. Right? What are they trying to do? They're trying to see where you are, and that's what we see in verse 13. It was a trap. They were trying to trap Jesus about possessions. Hey, should he have to give everything away or not? And what we see in this passage is the religious leaders who were the Pharisees, who had their hand in politics, and then the political leaders, they're called the Herodians. They had no religious implications at all. They're like a non-religious group. They're like, hey, we're saying nothing. But what do? They're teaming up with the religious people, right? So the people who were strictly politicians were like, hey, we need to get the religious people on our side. What does every political party try to do? Get the religious people on their side, right? Okay, so nothing's different, still all the same. And they were using Jesus and the ways of God for their personal gain. They were willing to, at the cost of Jesus, use him for their gain. And they will take this so far is that they will use him to the point that he gets crucified and killed. Why? For their gain. Okay? So, no matter who it is, know that politicians, all would be way too strong of a word. Part of their motivation is their gain. And they will use us, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, they will use you for their gain. Okay? Just know that. It's okay. They just will. People will use Christianity, and they'll also use it to discredit Christianity. Right? You Christians are all about this, or you Christians are all about that. People will use political views to discredit people. And what they do is they trap them with a lose-lose situation. Verse 14, they came to him and they said, they trapped him in his talk, Teacher, we know that you are true and do not care about anyone's opinion. What do they begin with? They flatter Jesus, right? So again, these are little signs that people want something. I was in sales for like years. You don't start with what's wrong. You start with what's right. They say, you are true And one commentator talks about, like, you never really describe somebody as true. They don't even know how to translate this word. It's like different. They're like, you are truthful, but they're saying the very essence, what they knew about Jesus is the very essence of who he was he was true. Like, has anybody ever described you as true? No. Right? It's not a word we use to describe people even, but there was something about Jesus. It says that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. They say, you are true. You do the true thing. You do the right thing. Has truth in his very being. It says that you don't, and then it says another weird phrase, you do not care about anyone's opinion. The real translation of that means it says that you don't look at men's faces. It says you don't look at men's faces. It says that Jesus isn't swayed by somebody's outward appearance. Jesus isn't swayed by what somebody says. He sees through it. Jesus sees the heart. And they knew this about him. That was Jesus' posture. He's like, I am about the truth and I am about what is right. And then they talked about, should we pay this tax? It was a poll tax, and it was a tax that was simply, it simply removed the money from the citizens and went to the emperor. So people don't like taxes. This was a tax that you literally got nothing for. It didn't even help your community. It just went somewhere else. So it was a tax just to pay the emperor. So if there was any tax that they didn't think they should have to pay, it would have been this one. Right? It wasn't like, oh, look, you pay this tax and then you get this out of it. Like, nope, this is just pointless tax. Just so the person in charge has more money. Okay? So it wasn't like this was a benefit to anybody. And they're basically asking Jesus, whose side are you on? Whose side are you on? If he says you have to pay this tax, that would have gotten Jesus into trouble with the religious leaders who hated Romans. Okay? So he would say, yeah, pay the tax. The Pharisees, the religious leaders, would have hated him. He would have been in trouble with them. Okay? So he already lost half of his followers. If he said no, then who's he in trouble with? The Romans. Because they're the ones that said you have to pay the tax. And so Jesus is in a what? Lose-lose situation. And what do they want Jesus to do? Pick a side. What do people want us to do with our politics? Pick a side. And then the side you pick is, guess who everybody else is? Your enemy. Wrong. Terrible. The worst person that's ever existed in the entirety of the entire world. Right? That's how this works. Do we feel this? Am I the only one? This is our world. People want to ask us, whose side are you on? It's a lose-lose situation. Scott Sauls, in his book called Jesus Outside the Lines, says, unless a human system, which all governments are, is fully centered on God, charger. That was my fault. I forgot I didn't forget, I remembered, but I couldn't find the charger for the extra computer. Then it dies and then it goes away. So, anyway, it's my fault for the distraction. Saul says, unless a human system is fully centered on God, and no human system is, Jesus will have things to affirm and things to critique about it. Okay, so if there is a system, if there is a government, if there is a political system, Jesus will have things to affirm and things to critique about it. Saul's going to say the political left and the political right are no exception. Okay, so if things are right-leaning, right? Jesus would look at right-leaning politics in our country and say, hey, this is good, this is good, this is good. I don't agree with this, and this. Right? And he would look to the left. He said, hey, actually, this is good. This is probably better than what they're doing over there. And then this is good. It's probably better what they're doing over there. But this, and this, I don't agree with. Okay? No matter what the system is, there would be critique. There would be things to affirm. And so, although everybody is called to vote and participate and do that, we should never feel fully at home in any party. There should be things, whatever affiliation you have, that you can affirm about it, and things that you can critique about it. Why? Because Jesus ain't running it. That makes us humble about these things. We can't see people's hearts. We're not always true. We're swayed by our own motivations and agendas. So that should humble us. And Jesus calls him out on this. He says, why do you put me to the test? So he's not fooled. He doesn't play their games. Saul says, when it comes to kings and kingdoms, Jesus sides with himself. Right? He lives according to his kingdom. Saul's referenced Joshua chapter 5. You guys heard, maybe if you've been around church or Christianity, you know the story of Jericho, where they march around the walls and they fall, all the stuff. It says that there was a commander, and it says that an angel of the Lord appeared to him, and the leader asked, "Are you for us, or are you for our adversaries? Are you for us, or like what side are you on? Which team are you on?" And look what the angel of the Lord said. No. Not on either of your teams. Why? I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Right? Which team are you on? No. Isn't there a little song? I'm part of the Lord's army. I didn't grow up going to church, so like some of the songs I don't always know. Yes. Saul's went on to say, the question then is not whether Jesus is on our side or on our team, but whether we are on his. And so this frees us from total allegiance to anybody. We're on Jesus' side. We don't have to get highly strung and highly stressed out or defending a position or defending a person. We can know that they're all somewhat untruthful. We can know that they all don't have a pure heart. Why? Because we all are often untruthful. We all often don't have pure hearts. And so we live in a culture, we live in a world who is setting political traps. And you don't have to walk into them. You can say no. Okay, so then what do? Okay, thanks, Brian. What do we do? How do we do that? So if that's the context, if that's the trap, how does Jesus navigate it? How do we then live? Verse 16, I called it just the cure. He says, verse 16 and 17 says, and they brought one, this denarius, this coin, and he said, whose likeness and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. And Jesus said to them, then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And then they marveled at him. They had a respect for him. They had a high view of his intelligence. So what does he teach us? What do we learn? And it's very subtle, but he starts in verse 15. What does he say? He says, whose likeness and inscription in this? The word for likeness there is image. And if you would have been a Jew in this time, the word image would hit your head, and you would shoot back to Genesis 1:26. And God said that I will make man into what? My image, and in my likeness. And I will give him the earth to care for and tend to and bring flourishing. He says, remember, no matter your political persuasion or your political side, you're dealing with image bearers of God. There's two implications for that. One is, treat everybody as image bearers of God. Treat the people you align with more as image bearers of God. Treat the people you don't align with as much as image bearers of God. They're people. They matter. They're valuable. We can't discard them. Right? So he's saying, hey, treat them as image bearers of God. Whose likeness is on there? And then also tied into being made in the image of God is every political party, every government, every engagement with our culture should seek the flourishing of the world that God has placed us in. That's what was going on in the garden. Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, subdue it, bring flourishing. That's what government is for. That's what politics are for. To bring flourishing for all people made in the image and likeness of God. Are there differing opinions on what the best way to do that is? Yes. Do people from different backgrounds and different places and different problems view how we should go about taking care of things differently? Yes. We'll talk about that in a little bit. He said, remember when you're online, when you're at the family dinner, and you got the uncle that always brings a thing up. Right? Maybe you are the uncle, I don't know. The person is made in the image and likeness of God. And he says there's two images, and so that means that there's two duties that Christians have obligations to. He says, render to Caesar the things are Caesar's. He says you have an obligation to the government. And so what does Jesus do? He appeases the Romans. He appeases the Herodians. He's like, yeah. You're in a time, you're in a place, so you have an obligation to that person, but you also have an obligation to God. As Christians, as followers of Christ, we have obligations to both. He's determined the times and places of our dwelling. We have obligations to both government and to God. So first he says, render to Caesar the things are Caesar's. Saul talks about this, that there's basically three institutions that God has established to resist decay in our world and to promote flourishing. He's given us the nuclear family, he's given us the government, and he's given us the church. All three are meant to do what Genesis 1 says, to help bring flourishing, to help things go well. So the Bible is very pro-government. It's all throughout the Bible. With his reply, Jesus acknowledges the legitimacy of human government. It's something that God has given to bring order, to bring safety, to bring provision, to bring stability to the world that we live in. It's important. William Barclay, this sounds a little harsh at the end, but I think that kind of startled me, and so hopefully it'll startle all of us. He said in a commentary on this, he says, failure in good citizenship is also failure in Christian duty. Untold troubles can descend upon a country or an industry when Christians refuse to take their part in the administration of the country or the area and leave that administration to selfish, self-seeking, partisan, and unchristian men. Last part seemed a little harsh, but I was like, hey, if you're not living for God, if you're not coming under the authority of God, you're living for yourself, and you're your ultimate authority. So to call people selfish and self-seeking, like that sounds harsh, but I was like, it's kind of true. Right? And so the role of Christians is to be engaged in the places that God has placed us, to participate. This wasn't, again, Brian super planning, but I appreciated that Frank actually did the reading today. He's been a councilman in Tequesta. He's been the mayor of Tequesta. He's running for council in Martin County. Why? It's not for the money, I can tell you that. He wants to see the flourishing of a place. He wants to see the goodness of the place. We need Christians who are engaged in these things. Saul's talked about that Christians should be seen as an asset and refreshment to the government and the politics of our world. I'll repeat that one. Christians should be seen by people who don't believe what we believe as an asset and as a refreshment to the political dynamics and government in our worlds. I don't think that's always the case. We need to become the type of people who are an asset and a refreshment. But also, so we need to participate, but government also isn't ultimate. God is. And that's where Jesus goes with this. He takes it a step further. He says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. So he's saying, render things to God. He's saying that our duty is to Caesar is surpassed by our duty to God. Right? In the book of Acts, they say, hey, stop talking about this Jesus. And they say, hey, we can't. We'll go to jail when you send us to jail. We'll go do this. But we're not going to stop proclaiming the name. We must obey God rather than man. Now, do they do that to stand up for a political agenda? Or a kind of a political hobby horse? No. They go to jail for those things. The primary call for Christians is to seek to live out the ethic of God's kingdom in all areas of life. To seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, as he calls us to do. And so what he says when he's rendering things to God, the Pillar commentary put it this way. He says, he reminded his hearers that in addition to their obligations to the state, they had obligations to God. And those two must be rendered. Again, dual citizens. We are at one and the same time citizens of some earthly state and citizens of heaven. So we're citizens of wherever you're from, of Jupiter, of South Florida, of if you're in visiting wherever you live. You're a citizen of that place, but at the same time, citizens of heaven. And the obligations of neither may be neglected. I love this part of it, though. He said the obligation to God covers all of life. And we must serve Caesar in a way that is honoring to God. We must serve Caesar. We must be engaged in politics. We must be engaged in government. We must have conversations about what brings the most flourishing in a way that is honoring to God. And so that shapes not only what we are about. So God says, like, hey, this is how things should be. This is how I created things. So it's how what things are about. But I think more importantly in our time and day, how we go about it. How do we engage in the conversations? How do we talk to our neighbors who disagree with us? How do we interact with people online? How do we pursue our agenda in politics? Does that make sense? I think that's what's been lacking. It's been lacking in our country, but I also think it's been lacking in Christians as well. We've kind of like, okay, Jesus, I know you say to love our neighbor and be kind and compassionate and all those things, but like, except for this area. Our relationship to God shapes our relationship to the government, and it's not the other way around. And so, how do we do that? How do we serve Caesar? How do we engage in politics in a way that is honoring to God? And this goes back to our original question, how do we become the type of people our politics needs? How do we become the type of people our politics needs? Where in his book says, our politics desperately needs people who have put away anger and rage and malice, slander, and filthy language. Right? That's in Ephesians 4. You can go look it up in your Bible. He says, you're a Christian, that's not who you are anymore. I know the temperature, the culture of our politics in our day is anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language. He said, do away from it. Do away with it. Put it away. He says our politics desperately needs people who are clothed with compassion and kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. So is he saying don't have a position or a view on how the world ought to work? No. He's saying, how do you have that view? How do you have that position? How do you engage with other people? And we do that through believing the gospel. We need to fully understand that we once were full of anger. I was full of rage. We were full of malice. We were full of slander. We were full of filthy language. We were, as Colossians 1 says, we were people of darkness. But the gospel says that through Christ, he has made us of people of light and life. So that when we see these things coming up, when we see anger, when we see rage, when we see malice and slander and filthy language, that's our old self. That's who you were. That's what Jesus came and died for. He took the penalty of sin upon himself on the cross. And so as we are engaging in conversations about what's best for our world, if you're a Christian, these have no place. These do. Compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. That's who Jesus has made us. Jesus says, I will put my spirit within you. This is who you are now. You're a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. When you put your faith, when you put your trust in Jesus, you're saying, Jesus died for, this is who I was. I'm going to put my spirit within you, and I'm going to make you new. That's how you become the type of person our politics needs. Because this is the type of person our politics needs. And in Christ, that's who you are. And so we need to become the type of people, and we become those type of people through believing in the gospel. But then it goes further. Not only do we just become those type of people, we follow in the path of Jesus. We pursue and seek the life that he has made available to us. We enter and live according to his kingdom. We engage in our world as people who have been delivered from darkness and placed into the kingdom of light. And so, practically, and I thought this was great, and I would encourage you to read this book. He refers to some social scientists in 2020. First of all, they came up with a term after 2016. There is a, is it the APA, the American Psychological, whatever, it's administration. And so after 2016, there was a new disorder called election stress disorder. Over 50% of our population experienced this. The thoughts of politics, the thoughts of election, increase stress. And then in 2020, there are some social scientists that talk about we have come into a place what they call political sectarianism. And it's what the dominant view of our culture and our world. And it's sort of framed by three things that I've learned three new words this morning and this week, and I'll explain them to you. It's sort of clothed with three things called aversion, othering, and moralization. Okay? They're saying this is the problem with our politics. Aversion, othering, and moralization. And so they said, hey, if we're going to be Christians, if we're going to engage in our culture and participate in our government and have conversations at our dinner table, we need to choose fellowship over aversion. And I was like, well, what's aversion? And aversion means to dislike and distrust those who disagree with us. To radically dislike and distrust those who disagree with us. It leads to resentment, retaliation, and revenge. They're saying this is what marks the political climate of our world. Not only do I just disagree with you, like I disagree with all kinds of people, right? They take it further, but because I disagree with you, I dislike you and distrust you. That's our political climate. They studied it. This is what people think, okay? And so in order to honor God, to be Christians, we have the power to seek fellowship over aversion. Jesus had something to say about this. He said, you heard it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and what? pray for those who persecute you. How can we practically do this? And as opposed to having a dislike and distrust with those who disagree with us, seek a relationship with people who disagree with you. Become their friend. And this means people within the church and those outside the church. To combat this culture of aversion, we need to seek relationships and display that you can actually be friends with people who disagree with you. Jesus is our friend, correct? You have a friend, another kid song. You have a friend in Jesus, right? Jesus disagrees with a lot that I do. Jesus disagrees with a lot that I think. Jesus disagrees with a lot that's in my heart. He's working on it. Okay? Not done yet. What does he not do? Cast me aside. What does that give us the power to do? Love. Be friends with. Be in relationship with people that we disagree with. The church has a huge opportunity to display the love of Christ. Where it talks about that to build a culture of service over othering. Othering means to view opposing partisans as essentially different or alien to oneself. It's viewing somebody as beneath you or completely other than you. It's the opposite of viewing somebody else as an image bearer of God. They're subhuman. They're inhuman. Because of what? Their political views. That's our culture. It leads to disdain. We're talking about having a posture, though, of service, to go serve other people. And he said to serve people, particularly in environments or for recipients that run counter to one's political views. It's a way to diminish our tendency towards othering. What's he saying? Go not only just be friends with people that don't agree with you, go serve people who disagree with you. So we have a partnership with Edna Runner Center. It's an after-school center we're going to be their neighbor. And every Thursday, I go and mentor my guys, Joshua and Jackson and Brandon. And then we just had a work day there yesterday. We were like, hey, what's your honey-do list? We would be at the center, and they'd be like, oh, there's somebody over there pulling weeds. And we're like, hey, you guys can actually invest in these kids. And Stephanie's great idea was, hey, tell us the things that you guys are doing or paying somebody to do that we could actually just go do. So we go and we wash the buses, and yesterday we wiped down, they got 100 kids in there, and they're all eating like Capri Suns and little crummy stuff on the tables every week. So we just wipe down the tables, pull some weeds. Marshall did some power washing. The stuff we do around our house that we like, hey, give us your honey-do list. And so each month they just send it to us, and on Saturday mornings we go from 9 to 11 and check off the list. You guys should come. The hope of that is to become more engaged at the place. And so on Thursdays, I go into this place, and I'll say, between the kids and the volunteers and the workers, there are people, I can just study demographic studies. It's not being judgmental. It's just saying, hey, if you're from this demographic, if you live in this place, if you do this, this is your political view. Okay, it's a generalization. There are people from every race. There are people from every political persuasion. There are people from every socioeconomic background. There are people from every age in that room. And guess what happens? Everybody gets along. It's amazing. Why? You're there to serve kids. We want what's best for these kids. We want these kids to flourish. When we have a posture of serving the greater good, all the other things goes down. Not fighting with anybody on their political views in that room. Nobody is. Why? Christians, we need to be getting back to doing that. That's the political agenda we need to be known for. How are we taking care of the orphans, the aliens, the sojourners, the fatherless, the widows? Make that our political agenda, and guess what? We don't have to fight with anybody because everybody's for that. I saw on Facebook, there's a thing next weekend called the Jupiter Irish Fest. And at the Jupiter Irish Fest next week, guess who they're honoring? Miss Edna Runner, who passed away